What I wanted to do this episode is take a look at some of the most common perceived challenges that farmers face when starting a market farm and get your perspective on how big of a challenge this particular subject posed to you. So if we're talking like bullies in high school, you could say Jack and Ryan. There was a guy, Ryan, at my high school who I hated that guy. So you'd be like, yeah, Ryan changed my life. He made me walk the other way around the campus to have to avoid him. So that's the type of thing we're looking for. These are the bullies of market farming that are coming, trying to win the war against you. The first one I have, and these are in no particular order, disease. Crop disease in general, whether that's crop disease on tomatoes, crop disease on lettuce, or any other crops. Not pest issues, disease. How big of an issue was crop disease this year for you?
Been almost none, really. And I chalk that up to two things. One, just luck, whether it was just good, better, ideal conditions, or maybe we don't have a ton of issues. And then two, it's just following the tried and true methods of kind of those that came before me that I've learned from. Obviously, trying to keep greens and stuff dry, unless it's like in the middle of summer and you're like watering in the middle of the day to cool things off. Things aren't getting super wet and gross where they can't dry off and they're just harbor for soil-borne issues. And so it wasn't a big problem. The only crop that we had an issue with, or family of crops, was just our cucurbits. Like all of our squash, just when we would like transplant out zucchini and yellow squash, half of the transplants would just die within the first couple of days. They would look really great, and the next day they'd be like wilty, and they had water, and then day 3, they're gone. Do a new planting of them, same thing. Winter squash, same thing. It was really bad. And then what was left is then squash bugs came in. But for the most part, other than our cucurbits, we haven't really had much issues. No real downy mildew, maybe a little bit on some brassica stuff that kind of just ran its course. It didn't really have much of a problem. So yeah, we got lucky and tried to keep excess dead vegetation and stuff free and keep things clean to help deal with all that. But so as far as soil-borne goes, yeah, no real problems.
That's interesting. I would have thought in the hot, humid South, rain in the summer would have been an issue. What does Crystal Organic face? Are they in the same boat? Not too much disease pressure?
Yeah, I don't think there was too much this year. Now, they do things on a bigger scale. So instead of having one bed of something, it's going to be a tunnel or multiple tunnels or a whole field of something. And so it could also just be the simple fact that I have such diversity because there's no two things are next to each other. And sometimes there's a mix of things interplanted amongst it. But I feel like both us and Crystal, any sort of real problems we had were more on the pest side than I can't really remember too many disease issues this year.
And you've grown a full year, right? So you've seen a full calendar year of everything.
We signed the lease on the property this time last year. So there was a few months before we really had anything in the ground, but more or less we're coming up on, I'd say by November was when we really started growing. So we're 10 months in.
Okay. So you have disease. So the bullies on the block. One is the little kid bully in Diary of the Wimpy Kid. It was like the 4-year-old tormenting Greg Heffley, and he was terrified of him. And then on the other end, you have the 10 is the guy, he's in jail now. Like he's committed a lot of crimes. You knew he was destined for jail. And he was just taking out his frustration of probably a really bad home life on you in high school. Where's disease fit in?
It's at least for this year. That's the only context I have. Yeah, I was definitely like the little kid. I think we were waiting and always wondering. And he just never really showed up in a major way. I mean, maybe if we happen to be a really heavy squash farm in the summertime, which I know some people are, maybe it would have been really devastating. But for the most part, wasn't really much of a problem.
Okay, not much.
Yeah.
Weeds, we'll get to save weeds. We'll do diseases, evil twin pests. They're often a vector that spreads disease.
Mhm.
Often when plants get disease, weeds, pests come in and finish everything off. But looking at pests in a vacuum, from cabbage moth to aphids to potato beetle, were pests. I keep wanting to say weeds. Were pests an issue?
Yeah, definitely. Partially just due to more a lack of management. Like we didn't have any sort of plan to mitigate it. I wanted to see if nature could run its course and maybe the wildlife around it, this real diversity of things. Maybe some predator species would come in and take care of that. But no, that's definitely this past spring, like flea beetle were just absolutely ravaged. Took out entire crops of things before we could ever even harvest them or get them to the point where they weren't able to really sell. So pests were definitely, I'd put them, I don't know if I'd say like all the way up at the very top, the worst bully ever. I don't really think we had any huge issues, but I think pests were probably the biggest sort of major challenge that's like outside of our control, like a natural challenge to overcome. Pests were probably the biggest one.
Where people new who haven't farmed and think about getting into it, listening to this, would you put pests more in? They slow you down, they reduce production, or they can kill a whole bed.
I guess starting at the small end, it can slow down production. You can get all the way to the point where it'll just, yeah, it'll ravage an entire bed to the point where it's better to just rip it out and throw it in the compost pile, like roots and all, just to deal with it. But yeah, so it can really span the gamut. I think best case scenario, it slows you down, wash pack. You're picking out bad leaves more than you would like to, or you're presenting a product at the farmer's market that's less than ideal.
Things in a perfect world you could do to mitigate the pest pressure issue?
Yeah, I guess have a diverse enough ecosystem and healthy and strong enough plants that they can defend it. Cause I know that's like a big thing in a lot of the regenerative space, that it's like healthy plants deter pests. Pests don't like healthy plants. They like weak plants. And so I'd say in a perfect world, yeah, we're just growing the most like nutrient dense, healthiest crop that, the aphids or the flea beetle or the harlequin bug or whatever just don't want it, or that the grasshoppers just don't exist. They cease to live anymore.
And in some cases, it's exclusion, it's insect netting, it's putting them in fully sealed tunnels, put
Yeah.
predatory insects in there, that type of thing, try and maintain. So where were they 1 to 10?
I'd put
Pest?
them at like an 8.
Okay, so pretty strong adversary for you.
Yeah.
All right. Weeds. I think they can be a farm killer. This is for sure the bully that went on to do really bad things. There's probably a Netflix documentary on them. They've done unconscionable things to people of the opposite sex and just lavished in it. And they sadly have a cult following by these women who are like 25 to 50 that love listening to all these true crime things. So that's weeds on the list here. How big of weed pressure?
Yeah. Yeah, weeds are, if I had to put them on a 1 to 10, I'd say 9 or 10. Our weed pressure was serious this year. It's starting to slow down a little bit, but it's just every time we felt like we were on top of one of them, it was like that seasonal cycle. The next new evil thing that was in the soil seed bank just popped up and took its place. Everything, grasses, legumes, your more little annual stuff to perennial weeds. It was just, we fought weeds all season long. And I thought that having really good compost would really help suppress weeds. And in a lot of cases, it didn't do a damn thing.
Was it weeds or was it grasses? Because I'll put those in separate categories. I'll say weeds are plantain and things like that that come into beds, where grasses are grasses. I know a lot of people have these rhizomatous grasses that
Mhm.
spread underground. So if you start cutting them, then you just really start spreading them and they become a nightmare. Were you weed pressure, grass pressure, or both?
It was both. Most of our grass pressure, honestly, though, was just from a lack of management of our pathways. A lot of crabgrass and centipede grass and stuff creeping in from the pathways. And you look at a bed and you're like, oh my God, I can't see anything because it's all grass. And you realize it's just growing up from the edges in the middle of the bed. It's totally weed free. But all of the other like those really hardy, like the amaranth, the pigweed. We have a coffee weed down here, all of the chickweed, henbit, all that stuff. It never stops. It's like a hydra. Like you pluck one out and there's three more to replace it as soon as you do.
Yeah, like Alien movie, right? There's just more
Yeah.
and more of them just keep coming and coming. All right, so weeds, yeah. This is one where I think this is doom for some people. This is you're in the house and you're like one of the last two people left in the movie. And guess what? You're not the one surviving here
Yeah.
because you had to go back in to get your phone that you left inside. But because they can, we talked about this in the last episode report, but they can stunt production by just shading out competing. They can take over beds and kill production by making stuff unharvestable. They can kill morale. They can wear people down physically. They're one of the problems that gets potentially uncontrollable.
Yeah.
If you take your house and you have the kids, sometimes they make such a huge mess. You're like, oh my God, where do we even start to pick this up? It's just so messy that it seems like you never dig out of it. They took the room and just shook the whole thing and everything is everywhere. And I think that's where weeds can be just demoralizing from that standpoint. And if there's a danger of somebody being taken out or overwhelmed, I think weeds and these grasses, really the grasses, can be the killer
Yeah.
for a lot of these farms. Shifting a little bit to climate. All right. So this is nuanced. Heat only. You're in the South. Heat growing in it can be a challenge for things like lettuce because they don't really like it.
Hmm.
Heat can be challenging just working out in it because it is tiresome and it's hot. So we're not counting other forms of weather here, just heat.
Really, it's, I think it's one of those things that it's probably one of the easier ones to adapt to, both in like the way that you grow, how you cover yourself when you work, those sort of things. I think it's relatively easy to mitigate it. And also, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like heat's also a bit of a mind game. If you just take it and say, I'm not going to let you beat me. You're not going to bully me today. You just, I don't know, you just get used to it. You almost forget how sweaty you are, forget how hot it is. And so it's more of just like a necessary evil that you just have to drudge through for a few months and then you're moved on. And maybe you need to water some more. Maybe you need to make sure you're on top of, make sure your shade cloth doesn't get blown off on your lettuces or whatever. Make sure that your seedlings are protected with the germination netting or with a tarp or just emitters to keep them moist. Heat hasn't really been much of an issue for us.
Okay. This is the bully that I grew up in the 90s, and they would say things that I can't say now because I'll get canceled to you and be like, hey, all right, let's go, let's go. And finally, you're like, all right, you want to fight?
Yeah,
And you get in their face, and they're like,
yeah.
no,
It's all bark, no bite.
exactly. Okay. So heat is one of those things. I think it can deter people, though. I don't know that everybody's fully ready for it. If you had a
Mhm.
cushy office job, like you've worked outside for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, even before we started working on farms, yeah, I was doing landscaping, I was doing outside construction. Yeah, I guess I'm tougher than most people. I'm stronger, better in every way possible. Yeah, I'm just more used to the heat.
And are you native Georgian?
No, I'm actually from Southern California originally. That's where I was born.
Okay.
So,
How long you been in Georgia then?
oh, I've been here Southeast Tennessee and Georgia for 20 years.
Okay, so you've at least acclimatized to that. It's not
Oh,
like
yeah.
you came from
Yeah.
the cool Pacific coast and then you moved into the humidity and you're like, what
No.
the hell did I just do? Like suddenly everything's stuck to parts of my legs that I didn't know it should be stuck to.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
used to it now.
Weather in general, and I put this in the category of rains, heavy rains, hail, wind. I know you probably don't get it. Maybe you get some of the hurricane effects as they come up through Florida and things like that. These are more, some I'll say normal type conditions of
Mhm.
just we get a ton of rain in 24 hours. I hear some of these numbers that people put out like 6 inches of rain in 24 hours, which out here in California, that'd be landslide city, we'd be in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
But and there's also the freak things, tornadoes and the hurricane byproducts. For you, what hand has the weather dealt you, putting heat aside this year?
It's been relatively easy. I'd say the one season that I feel like that generally has the biggest impact weather-wise is definitely gonna be winter. You get the last couple of years, we've just had some, like, freak freezes, which for our northern listeners, that's like any other Tuesday in July, it gets that cold. But for us, it drops down to getting into single digits. Like, we're just like, one, we're not acclimated, but it's like more than anything, like the plants are just not acclimated. It's like a kale can handle a frost, but if it was 35 and then the next day or within 48 hours, it drops down to like single digits, it's just that plant can only respond so quickly. And that's one of the issues with being here where we have traditionally mild winters is that a lot of times you do have a field full of stuff and sometimes you can really get screwed. But as far as anything else, we've gotten lucky, haven't had any hail or crazy wind or tornadic activity. I think doing raised permanent beds that are no-till has been a big lifesaver on rain. I know we talked about that in like maybe one of the first episodes is just like the first big rain event after forming my beds. And I like go out there to see where it just those pathways are flooded, but those beds are nice and tall and nothing's getting washed out. And so I think for the most part, due to the way we've oriented the farm, we're surrounded by trees. So we have a little bit of windbreak, things like that. Weather hasn't been much of an issue either.
Do you have to deal with watching the weather all the time? I visited a farmer once and I was amazed how much he had to look at his weather app on his phone. And I'm like, my God, dude, like I never check the weather app. No, I get it. I'm in Southern California. It's 65 to 70 and sunny all year round. But are you really watching it at least certain times a year? Is it going to freeze tonight? Am I going to get frost? Am I going to get a bunch of rain? Is that part of the routine to really be staying on top of that?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say rain and then freezing temperatures, the two main things. And sometimes with rain, it's to plan, and sometimes it's, you know, to plan and in a reactionary standpoint, like, all right, it's going to rain tomorrow. We were going to do this. Now we have to do this. Or it's, we really need to work this part of the farm, but we're not going to get rain until next week. So we need to plan accordingly because we don't want to do all this work while it's super dry. It's going to be hard. We definitely check for rain. Temperature wise, not as much. It's like it's summer. It's going to be hot. Does 95 versus 99 feel that much different? Not really. It's hot. But yeah, those, especially come wintertime, once those frosts start coming in, it's like multiple times a day. You're checking like, all right, it said 32. Now it's creeping down. Now it's saying 29. You're really watching it, or you're checking to see what time is it going to be above freezing so we can go out and harvest, those sort of things. So it's definitely a part of it. I check the weather every day. And then also farmers markets. Our farmers market got not rained out. We were there, but it was an abysmal turnout because it just rained the whole time. So I'd say I probably fret looking at the weather more for farmers market than I actually do production.
I guess that's actually part of it. That's a good thing I wouldn't have even thought of. It's obviously
Yeah.
heat, super hot, rainy. That's going to affect Saturday. That's going to affect sales, which affects everything. So
Yeah.
there's probably more weather effect on, I don't want to say more, but I guess there's a lot on the market as well as in the field.
Yeah, for sure. Because then if it's going to rain, then it's like, how much is it going to rain? Is it going to rain so much that it's really not even worth it, where it's going to be like monsoon? And do you even bother to go out and set your tent up and everything's soaking wet and nobody's going to show up? Or do you just say, by God, we're going to do it, rain or shine? And then if you are going to do it, you're blasting social media and email, newsletter, and everything to try to just let everyone know and encourage them, please, everything short of begging, please, this is my income, please come and buy stuff. And then if it's not, then you're having to figure out how am I going to offload all of the stuff that I've already picked. And so I'd say like rain on a market day has way more of a long term, it has much more repercussions than like rain on a production day for sure.
The weather is one of those things. It's an issue, but it's at the lower end. It's not life changing, not scaring you away, but definitely can cause problems.
Yeah, I think it's a weird in between where it's normally not a problem, but it has the potential to like completely wipe you out, whether it's a freeze or a hailstorm or a tornado or whatever. Where most things I feel like stays in this sort of in between. If you're looking at a bell curve, it's right there at the top of the curve where it can be a problem, but it can relatively be mitigated one way or the other. But weather can either be not a problem and then suddenly it can ruin you.
Yeah, it can
So
wipe
it's
you out. Yeah,
yeah,
some of these freak floods we've seen. Vermont had some this
yeah,
year.
yeah.
I've seen some in the past of Ray Tyler on his farm where it's just a river
Hmm.
flowing through it, and it's sad. Okay. I would have never put this one on the list, but somebody emailed it into me saying that this is something people have to think about. Physicality, doing physical work. For people that don't get into farming or aren't farming and want to get into it, a lot of those people are doing some sort of non-physical job, most likely. They're in an office and they're sitting a lot of the day looking at a screen. And he thought these people dramatically underestimate how physical the work is. And if you couple on to that, most people are not in the best shape anyway.
Yeah.
You're taking average Joe and putting them into something that's it's not like a Mudder or a Iron Man. It's not like that instantly grueling, but it's very hard over a long season.
Mhm.
And if you're not fully prepared for that, physically and mentally, it can scare people away quickly. Physically, how did you find the difficulty of doing this all on your own? I remember just some of the early conversations of building beds. It sounded like that took like way longer than you ever thought. And that's doing it by hand, a lot of the stuff you're doing. So when you look at this, one, how was it for you physically? And then two, I hate the double trigger here with two questions, but what was the physical demand relative to what you thought it would be?
Yeah, physicality is definitely something that I think, everyone's, oh, it's like hard work and I like to work outside. And I actually have a friend who used to have a very physical job and now he's riding a desk and he comes once a week and helps me out at the farm in the evenings. And he's, oh, it feels so good to work. I'm like, dude, we're pulling weeds, man. This is a walk in the park. If I could do this all day long, when he just feels good to be physical again. And I said, that's one of the things of if you can get a job on a farm for a few years, really put you through the paces, do full 12 months bending over all day long doing that. It's definitely something to think about when it works your body differently than like weightlifting does. It's exercise, but not in the same way of cardio. I tried to run for the first time the other day, and it's like after the first mile and a half, I was like ready to die. So like, all right, so cardio and farm work are not in the same category whatsoever. But but yeah, it's definitely something serious to consider. And I think there's really no way to know what it's going to be like until you just do it. First day I was at Crystal Organic, transplanting like a 200-foot bed of lettuce, and about halfway through, like, my, like, sciatic nerve started acting up, and I'm like, "Oh my god, can I do this every day?" And then after a week or so, my body just adapted and got used to it. But just like with any sort of physical exercise, you do it enough, you build up some strength, you build up some stability, and then you can keep doing it. But it was definitely more demanding from the standpoint of everything on our scale is almost totally human scale. I'm not really doing a lot of tractor work other than initial tillage. And then other than that, we're done. So we're pulling weeds by hand. We're lugging buckets of turnips by hand. We're slinging compost and wheelbarrows by hand. And then there's like the mental side of you're out there by yourself with the 12th wheelbarrow load on a bed and it just doesn't stop. And that's pretty tough to deal with physically and mentally, all wrapped into the same thing. Second. Hey, babe, I gotta finish my podcast. Can you go? We'll do your podcast when you're done in just a second.
10 minutes.
You put the pants on. Hopefully she didn't flash the camera.
I will edit it out. Edit for the editor.
Okay.
Edit,
Yeah.
edit, edit. Yeah, I think physical work is underestimated by people. if you don't do it. Just think about how much you bend over on a farm to transplant and pick things up, and the average person probably really doesn't bend over that much. Maybe in the
Yeah.
shower to wash their legs and then put on their socks and put on their shoes and then take their shoes off, but they're not bending over nonstop, and that is more work than you think if you haven't done it. And for people that are totally out of shape, going to do this and then you compound it. So you take all these bullies and you gang up. Not only is it physical work, but you're doing it in extreme heat and humidity, right?
Mhm.
And you're also maybe dealing with some morale of, oh, I got to pull weeds too. So you have this trifecta of evil forces that are now, it's 1 + 1 is not 3, it's 5 coming at you. What about, this is the last one I have on my list, is I think a challenge for people, competition. Going to be different in every market. Some markets have obviously way more than others. Lack of competition can be a bad thing because it could just mean there is no demand or you're in a really
Mhm.
tiny town, a small area. So ironically, you may actually want to go into a bigger market with more competition to for the potential to sell more. But it's a challenge people are going to face. You're not selling in a vacuum. You're not going to have a
Mhm.
captive market in most places. For you, thoughts on competition?
Yeah, I think competition is I think it's what you make of it in a weird way. It's more of a mental thing than it is like the physical constraints of who's around you. I think because in some ways you can see the first couple of months at the farmer's market, I was like coming in like, all right, these people aren't my friends. These are competition. Like I'm like competing against them to get every sale possible and to be the best that I can be. Just that competitive nature that I have with everything. And then obviously since then, realizing it's no, like these people can be allies, these people can be supporters, and we can all work together. And so there's that side of it where I think it's more of a mental game of like, how do you handle the people that are selling the same thing or their stuff looks better than yours or they have more of it than you or whatever. They've been more established. And then I think also on the physical constraints of competition, I think it just breeds ingenuity, whether it's changing what you're growing to fill a niche that's not there. With this other potential market I might do, everybody's going to be growing the same stuff that I'm growing. And so that's going to be some serious competition all the way around. Like they're more established, their stuff. And so I think it can be a good opportunity to say like, all right, so maybe we're not going to be a solely market farm. Maybe we are going to find some restaurants. And because we're a smaller farm, maybe we're going to find some of these like little smaller restaurants that are in like a smaller city instead of going to fancy restaurants in Atlanta where, maybe they the other bigger organic farms in our area aren't going to mess with these restaurants because frankly the amount of sales that they need is so minimal to them that it's not even worth their time, but for you it's perfect. And in that sense, the constraint of competition can sometimes it can be like a narrow doorway that opens up into a really creative possibilities. And I think with that, maybe I've just been lucky that or it was intentional that I chose a market that sort of balanced opportunity and competition where I felt like I could fill a niche and really stand out, but not be on the side of the road by myself where you're the only one there. It's that in between.
Hang on. One of my kids' tablets is in here ringing somehow. All right. We'll edit that out too. I love that you said that it can fuel ingenuity and creativity. I
Hmm.
think that's what it is. It's every challenge on this list. You can decide if you want to let it define you, or you can use it as motivation to define your own self and your own story. So, disease, competition, heat, weather, weeds, pests, physicality, they're all dials that different locations can turn up. It's like players in a game like Madden. There's all these ratings, right? And somebody's really fast, but they don't have, I don't know, a lot of endurance. I'm not a gamer, so I don't know. But these are the challenges that are on the table. If you
Hmm.
are getting into this, be aware it's not just cushy. It's not just a walk in the park.
Not
There
at all.
are these bumps out there that will obstruct your journey and you're going to have to find ways around. You're going to have to problem solve to get around these. Some you may foresee coming, some might hit you out of the blue, like you said, with things like hail, and they can wipe you out. And this is where grit, perseverance, adaptability, ingenuity, creativity, all these things come into play that aren't farming skills per se. They're unique traits to people that some people have. Some people need to just to cultivate that within themselves, but they're things that people will face when you get into farming. So be ready for it because I don't think it's easy. If you look back at your last year coming from a farm, now doing your own farm thing, for if I was brand new, I want to start a farm just like you. I've listened to the podcast, I want to do it. How hard is it? What would your how would you answer that question to me? How hard has this been?
It's hard. It's mentally taxing, emotionally, financially, physically. I don't think there's any part of it that's easy. I think some of it is just the nature of being a solopreneur. You're doing everything. And so everything, and most of it's new. And so it's, you know, not, or new things tend to be hard. You've never done it before. But yeah, you have moments where you catch a break or you find, oh, I'm good at this and this doesn't really feel like work that much, so on and so forth. But yeah, there's challenges and every day there's a new challenge. And I think that's another benefit of just taking your time, whether it's like taking a few years on another farm or just going slow. It's that those challenges are not static. It's not like the weather is always a 5 or pests are always a 7, that it's like those dials are being turned as the seasons go on. Like right now, wind is not a problem, but come end of December into January, when those cold fronts will blow in and it's like it's going to get into the teens or into single digits tonight, and you're fighting with this crazy wind blowing in as you're trying to put row cover on. And then it could be one of those things that it blows off your row cover in the middle of the night and everything freezes. That's not a problem I have now, but I've done this a few years now, so I know that's going to be a problem. But I also know pests won't be a problem when it's cold. And so it's also knowing that with a lot of things, if you can just endure these challenges for a season, like a literal seasonal cycle, then a lot of times you can catch a break on that just in time to prepare for the next set of challenges that are coming with whatever fall or winter, or spring or summer bring.
It's really well said, and I like that you mentioned the mental side of things, the financial side of things. Obviously, those go with business. Those aren't exclusive to farming, but they are things that you navigate. And mental challenges are really they can be a bit of a byproduct of all these. Heat causes stress, or germination due to disease or something that's going to cause mental stress. And then you have the
Hmm.
financial side, which can be affected by some of these pests, affect your finances. Weather shuts down a market, that affects finances. The other part of life that's not the farm can affect finances. So it is another challenge that people have with business, and everything has challenges. I run this online store selling farm tools, seeds, equipment. We have our own set of challenges. So it's not as though any business is immune. It's
Hmm.
just there there are challenges. What do they look like for your industry? And how can you best handle those challenges? And in a lot of ways, I think it's the people that survive are the
Yeah.
ones that handle those the best because the knockout rate for entrepreneurship in general is really high. That should look that stat up. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's really high. And
Mhm.
what's going to knock you out? It's going to be one of these things that causes either too money to run out due to lack of sales or spending to fix problems or misjudging things and messing up your inventory. But yeah, you've done a really good job of navigating all this to make it through the better part of the first year.
Mhm.
And if you can do that, then I think it gets easier a little bit, at least to handle. Not that the world can't throw stronger weather anomalies at you, which it probably
Yeah.
will. But you can't control that. But at least every time you go through a season, we faced it before. And then
Yeah.
facing it and overcoming it gives you this mental trophy behind you of, oh, we dealt with flea beetle before. It wasn't good, but we figured it out. And you
Yeah.
start to build confidence that way of, I had weed pressure, I solved it. I had this problem, I solved it. And I think the more problems people do in life and business and solve them, that's where you truly get better because you have the confidence knowing that you've seen it and you dealt with it. And that makes it less scary next time you have it. And you also have developed this little set of solutions. Oh, last time we tried this, we can try this now. And what used to be a 10 out of 10 problem, since you've dealt with it before, now that's a 2. We can just deal with it
Mhm.
real quick and move on. And I think that's probably how your curve will progress is the challenges never go away, but you just have more experience dealing with them.
Yeah, and I think one big benefit and what can bring a lot of success is if you meet a challenge and then you have to decide what you're going to do. It's like picking a play. Like you're on the line of scrimmage, like what play are we going to run? And it feels like the first year, like every play that I'm running is basically I'm looking at the defense and go, or let's say I'm on defense, I'm looking at the offense and it's like, all right, so quarterback set up here. We're going to react. We're going to shift our players around and we're going to run a play based upon what they're doing in this reactionary standpoint. Let's say it's the first game of the season. We've never faced these guys before. Where next year, or even I guess now, because I'm coming to the point where I'm doing it again, even this year, it's going to be more of thinking back to what happened last year. It's the equivalent of watching game film. And then so now we're calling plays, we're calling audibles. I know we're back on offense now, but calling audibles, we're doing different things based upon the game film and the prior knowledge of how this adversary is going to perform. And so now we're actually being proactive. And so we're calling plays and we're doing things ahead of time, anticipating what they're going to do, knowing like flea beetles are going to show up on these crops around this time of the year. So let's get ahead of this challenge. And maybe we can't completely mitigate it, but then when they do show up, we're ready to fight them. And I think that's going to be a big key to success is moving away from reacting to challenges and being proactive to prepare for them.
Yeah, that's where 2 weeks into the NFL season, you see all these highly lauded quarterbacks that went early. Caleb Williams and Jalen, is his name Williams too? I lost. Bo Nix. They all stink. And because it's like suddenly the dial has been turned up. Everything that they were used to, it's now 10
Yeah.
times faster and confusing. And there's Sam Darnold on a hot mic going up against Bill Belichick seeing ghosts. And I think that's what first business is like. What the hell is going on? Like, I can't
Hmm.
interpret any of this. But like you said, after you get it down, you've watched the film, you've been through the plays, you start to calm down and you can, all right, I'm starting to audible, I'm starting to adjust. It's just you can't get knocked out that first season. It's I gotta make it long enough to
Yeah.
use my mental database and learnings and my notes to do better the next year.
Yeah, and do your best to stay cool in the pocket. Maybe we can do an episode on like mental health here soon. But it's like I've discovered I have quite an issue with anxiety, and some of it is like just mindset. Some of it's trying to supplement with things to help my mind and things like that. But it's if I can, because sometimes it's like the decisions that get made in the spiral, like that downward spiral, can be the difference between are we going to get through this or are we going to crumble? And I think that's another thing. It's like, all right, we're in the middle of a challenge, we're in the middle of this struggle. It's like, how are we going to respond? How are we going to think about it mentally? And sometimes it's not as reactionary as let's attack it right now, but it's more of let's let it go. All right, they scored a touchdown. It's okay. We still have another half of the game to play. We got plenty of time on the clock. Let's just breathe. We lost that one. We lost that crop. It's okay. Let's just move on and prepare for the next one. It's just one down at a time. And so I think that's another big part of it too. It's just knowing when to cut your losses on a particular crop and say, it's a cover crop. That bed is getting yanked out, or I'm not going to have this at the market or whatever, and just know when to move on and just plan for the next thing, which is what my squash was. I had all this amazing winter squash on all these beds and I mulched them and they were perfect. And I couldn't control what was in the soil. and it just ruined it. And I had to just go, all right, we're done. Let's get something else. Let's yank it out and let's get something else in there. And it's just say, all right, no winter squash this year. We'll try again next year.
Absolutely. And my wife's starting a business and she's made a couple missteps lately. Nothing catastrophic, but she just feels she gets a little bit demoralized because I spent time on this or lost some money on this. And I just try and tell her, you're gonna make mistakes. Like you just
Mhm.
are. Nobody's perfect. JM or whoever you idolize in farming isn't the perfect farmer. They've screwed up a lot. And like you said, all these challenges are thrown at you. Some of them you'll handle well, some you won't, meaning you just might make a bad decision. Not that you'll freak out, but I'm going to go with plan A and it just turned out to be wrong for whatever reason. And it's just to get back in there. There's, like you said, a lot of game time left. Forget it. Let's move on. We can't fixate on it. And the
Mhm.
mental side of it is a big part of that. So don't think that every move you make works.
Yeah.
That won't. You're gonna make missteps. You're gonna lose crops. You're gonna waste money. You're gonna lose money. You're gonna waste time. And you're gonna do things in hindsight that are stupid. But hopefully, it's those stupid things and those bad decisions that help you make better decisions down the line.
Yep. Exactly.